The Haunting of Blickling Hall, a story from Norfolk. May 1986. Blickling Hall, Norfolk, England. For centuries, locals around Norfolk have whispered that on the night of May 19th, the ghost of Anne Boleyn returns to her birthplace, Blickling Hall, in a spectral carriage drawn by headless horses. This legend has always fascinated Caroline, a history student and tour guide at the hall. She had heard countless stories from visitors about strange sights and sounds, flickering lights in empty rooms, eerie whispers that seemed to come from nowhere, and above all, sightings of Anne herself, forever bound to the place of her birth. Caroline loved her work, but she had never believed in the ghost stories. Not really. She had an academic's mind, and to her, they were tales woven by centuries of folklore. That is, until one quiet spring evening, when she volunteered for the late shift to prepare for a group of historians visiting the following morning. As night fell, a thick mist descended over the estate, turning the hedgerows and gardens into dark silhouettes, twisted and indistinct in the moonlight. The old house loomed ahead, its ancient brick walls and sprawling wings casting long shadows across the ground. Caroline locked up the final exhibition room and started to make her way back up to the main entrance, her footsteps echoing in the otherwise empty hall. The silence of the house was unsettling, and she felt a strange prickle on the back of her neck, a sensation as though she was being watched. Dismissing it as a product of her own nerves, she continued her way down the long gallery when she heard it, a faint rustling, like the soft swish of a gown brushing against the floor. Caroline froze. The hall was empty, she was certain of it. She waited, holding her breath, but all she could hear was her own heartbeat pounding in her ears. Just as she convinced herself it was nothing, the sound came again, louder this time, and accompanied by another, soft, measured footsteps, as though someone were walking just behind her. Summoning the courage, she turned around, but the hallway was empty, just shadows deep and long stretching from the tall windows. She laughed nervously, trying to shake off the lingering chill in her bones, and hurried towards the exit. As she passed the large old portrait of Anne Boleyn, she noticed something peculiar. The eyes of the painting seemed to follow her, and there was a sadness in Anne's face, an expression she hadn't noticed before. She looked longer than she intended, feeling a strange sense of sorrow emanating from the image, as if it was watching her, pleading with her. Ridiculous, she murmured to herself, but her footsteps quickened, and she avoided glancing back at the portrait. When Caroline finally reached the entrance hall, she saw a figure standing in the dim light by the door. Her heart leapt, but she quickly relaxed, assuming it was one of the caretakers finishing up. As she approached, however, she realized that the figure was not someone she recognized. The woman was dressed in an elaborate Tudor gown, the rich fabric shimmering in the moonlight, and she held her head at an odd angle, almost as if she were supporting it delicately. Her face was pale, her expression one of anguish and intense sorrow. Caroline stopped, her breath catching in her throat as she realized with chilling clarity who this apparition must be. It was Anne Boleyn, her face hauntingly beautiful, her dark eyes filled with sadness, but what horrified Caroline most was her neck, where a faint line of red traced the skin, the mark of her beheading. Anne looked directly at her, her gaze intense and piercing. For a moment, Caroline felt as if she was being pulled into the past, caught in the sorrow and pain that Anne must have endured. She wanted to speak, to reach out, but her voice failed her, and her feet felt rooted to the spot. Then, just as suddenly as she had appeared, Anne began to fade, her figure dissolving like mist until there was nothing left but the empty hall and the cold air pressing in on all sides. Caroline's experiences continued over the next few weeks. Sometimes she would hear voices, whispered conversations in empty rooms, laughter that seemed to drift down the hallways only to vanish when she tried to locate its source. She even caught glimpses of Anne's ghostly figure in the gardens, walking slowly among the hedges as though she was searching for something. One night, exactly a year after her first encounter, Caroline was working late again, sorting documents in a small office at the back of the house. The night was quiet, and she had all but forgotten about her previous experiences, that is, until she heard the unmistakable sound of hooves clattering on the cobblestone path outside. She stood, a chill settling over her as she walked to the window. In the moonlight she saw it, a spectral carriage, drawn by headless horses, moving slowly up the drive. The driver was cloaked in darkness, faceless, and in the carriage sat a solitary figure, her face illuminated by an eerie light. It was Anne. Her expression filled with the same sorrow Caroline had seen before. She stared straight ahead, her hands folded in her lap, as if resigned to some eternal fate. The carriage passed by in silence, disappearing into the night as quickly as it had come. Caroline watched, her hand pressed to her mouth, unable to tear her gaze away until the vision had vanished. She would later learn that this was the very date of Anne's execution, May 19th, a date that, according to local legend, Anne's spirit returns to Blickling Hall, doomed to relive her tragic journey. Caroline left her position at Blickling Hall not long after. She spoke little of her experiences, reluctant to share what she had witnessed, but she remained haunted by those moments, by the sorrow in Anne's eyes, by the weight of history that seemed to hang in the air of that ancient house. To this day, visitors of Blickling Hall report sightings of Anne's ghostly figure, the sound of phantom carriages on dark nights, and the eerie, sorrowful presence that fills the hall each May. Those who have seen her say she carries an overwhelming sadness, a grief that reaches across the centuries, and a gaze that seems to see into the souls of all that dare to look back. And for those who linger in the halls of Blickling Hall after dark, there is an unspoken understanding that they are not alone, and that the spirits of the past never truly leave.